Chapter 12. Deliberate Disloyalty. A new panel of judges had to be selected for Captain Dewar's court-martial. There was the matter of superiority for one thing. Being of higher rank than Daniel, and, by regulation, having to be tried by his seniors and peers, 5 rear admirals and 4 captains were chosen to sit in judgment. The court assembled aboard HMS Eagle on the morning of 4th of April. There was no sign of the Mediterranean spring. It was yet another chill, grey and overcast day. Dewar, swordless as was the custom, was escorted before his judges. Then the audience was admitted. It was very much the same mixture as before. Curious naval officers, reporters, a sprinkling of civilians, and Mrs. Dewar supported by the unhappy Mrs. Daniel. The traditional question was asked. Had either the defence or the prosecution any objection to any member of the court? The monocled prosecutor, Rear Admiral William Boyle, C.B., commander of the 1st Cruiser Squadron, had. Showing great fairness, he argued against the presence of Rear Admiral the Honourable Herbert Meade, C.B., CVO, DSO, on the grounds that he had been a member of the original Court of Inquiry and of Rear Admiral Wilfred Tomkinson because, as Chief of Staff to Sir Roger Keyes, he had read the minutes of the inquiry. The court, so recently assembled, was immediately cleared of spectators, and the 2 officers next in seniority, Captain Hubert Munro, DSO, of the battleship Ramillies, and Captain Arthur Bedford, of the flagship Queen Elizabeth, were substituted for the controversial admirals. Then the prosecutor raised another objection, this time to Collard himself. According to the rules, Collard was eligible to become a substitute member of the court should the need arise, say in case of sickness. The Rear Admiral prosecutor pointed out emphatically that Collard was already a witness for the prosecution. This protest, too, was allowed. When it was Dewar's turn, he made no objection, for there was no need. His work had been done for him. Day Kimball was also in court. He was supposed to assist Dewar, but the captain had very definite ideas of his own as to how his case should be conducted, and he was going to brook little interference from the civilian in striped trousers. The 2 charges against Dewar were that, being a person subject to the Naval Discipline Act, he was guilty of an act to the prejudice of good order and naval discipline, in that he accepted and forwarded a letter addressed to him by Daniel, the terms of which were subversive of discipline, and that he did the same thing with a letter that, contrary to King's Regulations and Admiralty Instructions, Article 11, contained remarks and criticism on the conduct of orders of a superior officer, Rear Admiral Bernard St. George Collard. Quietly, Dewar pleaded not guilty to both accusations. The first witness called for the prosecution was Dewar's secretary aboard Royal Oak, Paymaster Lieutenant Crichton. He gave evidence as to his role in typing the letters of Dewar and Daniel. When he finished, Dewar took over the cross-examination himself, leaving Kimball to sit silent. Dewar: Were you my secretary? Crichton: Yes. Dewar: In the course of your duties, you had seen me on a great many different occasions. Crichton: Many. Dewar: From your observation, do you think I am the sort of person to lose my temper with an admiral? Crichton: Never. The witness agreed that Dewar had stressed the need for secrecy in the typing of the letters, and that the wardroom was indignant about the incidents that had occurred on board. He also stated that he was well aware of the forthcoming inspection of Royal Oak by Collard. Dewar: When you heard of the incidents described in my letter, and you saw that the captain and the admiral were evidently at loggerheads, did it ever enter your head that the result of the inspection might be slightly prejudiced? Crichton: Yes. Rear Admiral Collard was the next witness. The atmosphere in Eagle's chill steel hangar, its canvas awnings buffeted by a squall of rain from time to time, sensibly heightened. There was a distinct tension in the air, almost as though a famous criminal lawyer was about to cross-examine the accused in some sensational trial at the Old Bailey. For the first time since both men had so abruptly quitted Royal Oak, Collard and Dewar were about to come face to face. The Rear Admiral with a temper of quicksilver, and the quiet, intellectually minded captain determined to clear his name. But the drama would have to wait until the Vice Admiral prosecutor had determined the witness. For the second time inside a week, Collard stood before the long, beige-covered table. He was as immaculate and as pinkly shaven as ever, and radiated an air of utter impartiality and lack of involvement, almost like the perfect policeman giving evidence, telling the facts and letting the fault and blame lay where they fell. Nor in any way was his attitude of pretense. Collard's emotions were always an open book, to be read in his face with no difficulty at all. Now he gave the air that if it were not for the trifling matter of his having to give evidence and the earlier objection to his presence by the prosecution, He might well have been sitting in impartial judgment at that table with his fellow rear admirals. He gave no hint whatsoever that, although he had not been accused himself, he was as much on trial as his two subordinate officers. While everyone else might gossip and marvel at a newly appointed rear admiral who had lost his flagship so quickly, there was no reading any such thought in Collard's attitude as he turned his bright eyes to the prosecutor. The first few questions alone would have disconcerted many other men. So were the answers that he was forced to give. Yes, he had been rear admiral, 1st Battle Squadron recently. Yes, he had taken up that appointment on Monday, 7th November 1927. Yes, he had struck his flag on Monday, 12th of March 1928. But it took only the 6th question for Collard to lose his disposition and give a flash of that temper he had shown during Daniel's trial. He was asked how Dewar came to be appointed as his flag captain and chief staff officer. I was asked by the First Lord of the Admiralty if I had any objection to Captain Dewar being appointed as my flag captain. I replied that I had no objection. He was about to say more when the Deputy Judge Advocate objected on the grounds that the answer was hearsay. The questioning continued. No, Collard had not known Dewar before. He had met him, at the most, only twice or once in his life. His relations with him as staff officer were correct, but not intimate in any way. Collard said he found it impossible to make friends with his staff captain, however hard he tried. The attitude between them was perfectly correct from a service point of view, but there was no friendship. By now it was becoming apparent to the court and the spectators how strongly Collard stressed the word "my" when he referred to his flag captain, just as it had when he had given evidence during Commander Daniel's trial. The prosecutor. Did you place implicit confidence in him? Collard. No, I cannot say I did. He was handed the letters written by Dewar and Daniel and asked if he had seen them before. Collard answered, I have. At about 1400 hours on Friday, the 9th of March, I was in my cabin with my secretary doing some paperwork. The flag captain came in carrying a large buff envelope, which he placed down on the right-hand side of my table, with the remark, Complaints for the Vice Admiral. He then left my cabin. Collard was asked to comment on the letters from a disciplinary point of view. But Dewar got to his feet and objected, pointing out, with considerable truth, that that was what the court was there to decide. Soon afterwards, the prosecutor concluded his examination. Dewar rose to his feet to cross-examine, and everyone in that hangar sat up more sharply. The rear admiral and the captain were about to have matters out for the first time in public. Collard seemed utterly composed. If he had not been so service-like, so square-shouldered, and immaculately erect, then it would have been very easy to compare him with a sun-drowsing lizard ready to flick out a tongue at a passing fly, but hardly bothered whether any such creature should pass his sleepy horizon at all. On the other hand, Dewar was a distinguished graduate of the Royal Navy Staff Course where, above all, officers were measured by their ability to express their thoughts with sharp clarity, to marshal their ideas in a crisp and impeccable order. Yet all this training seemed to have deserted him as he stood up and asked Collard his first question. It was so convoluted, so orotund, as to be incomprehensible. The prosecutor adjusted his eyeglass and protested. Rear Admiral Townsend, the president of the court, growled that the court wanted plain questions and no trimmings. It was not a good start for the accused captain. What he had been trying to ask was whether Collard agreed that the reason that, as captain, he had sent on Daniel's letter largely depended on the truth or otherwise of the incidents described in his own letter. Once he had grasped the question, Collard answered stoutly that he did not agree. Dewar attacked from another angle. He asked Collard, Will you give me your version of the incident described in paragraph 2, which I will read to you? At an evening dance given aboard HMS Royal Oak on 12th January, Rear Admiral Collard threatened me, in the hearing of several guests, that if I did not make the commander do his duty in introducing people to each other, he would make me rue it. Again, the prosecution objected. How could all this be relevant? Dewar was forced to plead to the court. He submitted that the justification for forwarding Daniel's letter very largely depended on the truth or falsehood of the report of the incidents in his own covering letter. The effect on his own career, if those incidents were not true, would most certainly be prejudicial. Then Dewar played a trump card. He said that the point had arisen before he had left England on his way to the court-martial. The legal branch of the Admiralty had doubted whether investigation of the incidents would be relevant to the two charges against him. I therefore wrote to the Admiralty, Dewar told the court, and explained that, if this were so, I would have no chance of them of employment again, and I received a reply from their lordships, the last paragraph of which was to the effect that their lordships' sole purpose in sending Rear Admiral Collard out here for cross-examination was so that the defence would have an opportunity of elucidating such facts as they may have to answer. Dewar asked the court if he might submit the letter and have it read out, so that it could be relied on for whatever the defence regarded as relevant questions. Once more, the court was cleared. When everyone was called back, the President announced, though he never explained why, that the Admiralty letter was not to be read out. However, the court would have no further objection to questions referring to incidents contained in the letters, but that there was to be no hearsay evidence. "Is that clear?" barked the President, who, as Admiral Superintendent of Gibraltar, was reputed to have a testy side to his nature. Dewar, having finally overcome the court's reluctance to discuss Collard's behaviour, gently agreed, and returned to his battle with his Rear Admiral, who, while the argument had been going on, had assumed an air of amused indifference. Once again Collard asked him about the dance and whether Collard had said Daniel was not doing his duty, presenting the air of a man who was determined to be patient and even long-suffering if need be. The witness answered at some length. In the course of it, he said that when he had arrived on the quarterdeck with his guests, after his own private dinner party, he was immediately struck by the number of ladies sitting about without partners. He had approached Dewar, who had answered that it would be all right presently when the dance really got going. Collard said he had described the situation as a disgrace. Dewar had got very angry and retorted that it was the commander's job. Collard had answered by saying that if Dewar could not make the commander attend to his duties, then he would. That, said the Rear Admiral in a firm and dismissive voice, is all about that particular incident. For some reason known only to himself, and to the irritation of the court, who manifestly felt that the less it heard about the dance the better, Dewar insisted in trying to pin Collard down as to which dance it was when this exchange took place. The Rear Admiral was not at a loss for a moment. He said sharply that he could not tell because the dance programme was unreadable. Dewar faced this new allegation by answering tartly, "Thank you." Then he asked, "Did you use the expression to me, 'bite the commander'?" Collard, "As far as I remember, I said to you, 'If you cannot make the commander do his job, I will.'" Dewar, "I asked you, did you use the expression, 'bite the commander'?" Collard, still giving an impression of being at peace with the whole world, answered amiably, "Not as far as I remember, but I should never have minded using it at all." No, he had not told Dewar at the time that it would make him rue it if the commander did not do his duty, nor any words to that effect. No, he had not heard of people who thought that he had said any such thing. Yes, he would be surprised if there was a witness. The questioning turned to Collard's attack on the bandmaster. He had a full answer ready. Halfway through the dance, so he told the court, he thought that the band was playing perfectly abominable dance music. He heard complaints from guests all around him. He looked over at the band and saw that apparently the bandmaster was taking no interest at all, and his men looked sulky. At the end of that particular dance, he had sought out the commander, knowing that officer's considerable interest, and complained. He and Daniel had walked over to the bandstand and had stood 3 or 4 yards away so that the bandsman could not hear, and he had signalled Bandmaster Barnacle. True, he had told Barnacle that it was a bloody awful noise. Then he and Daniel had walked back to the ship's side where Daniel's partner was waiting, and, as they did so, had said, "We cannot have a bloody man like that as the bandmaster of the flagship's band. He takes no interest in the band, let us get rid of him." Daniel had protested, but Collard had insisted that the Royal Marines be sent below and the Volunteer Naval Band produced. There was not one mention in his answer of the word bugger. What is more, he denied using it when Dewar asked him. Dewar, "The words you said, were they not in the hearing of guests?" Collard, "It was in the view of all. I suppose there were a great many guests, but the words I said were not in the hearing of anybody. Would it not be in the hearing of the bandsman? I should say it was absolutely impossible for any of the bandsmen to have overheard the conversation. Would you be surprised to hear that there are 5 bandsmen who are prepared to swear that they not only heard you, but they heard the word bugger? I would. Do you think they are lying? I think so, not having heard their evidence. Did you shake your fist at the bandmaster? I do not know. Would you be surprised to hear that there is a witness who saw you? I should. Dewar referred to the alleged row at the gangway when the dance was over while the guests were leaving. Collard answered flatly, and by now much less benevolently, "So far as I know, you have entirely imagined that scene." After further objection by the court to the way in which Dewar was phrasing his questions and conducting his cross-examination, he turned to Daniel's letter and asked Collard if he thought it a fair statement that there was intense disgust and indignation among the wardroom officers at his behaviour. He got little change for his efforts. The Admiral answered, "I have no means of knowing whether there was a great deal of discontent or intense disgust or indignation amongst the officers. Had there been so, I suppose my flag captain would have informed me about it. As he did not, I can only take it that there was none." The Admiral had most certainly got his former captain's range now. Every answering salvo became a hit. Dewar, do you think, if this incident were true, the bandmaster would likely be discouraged and dissatisfied by an incident of this kind? Collard, I really cannot answer for the bandmaster. Dewar, imagine yourself in the position of the bandmaster on being taken out in front of your band and abused in this manner. Would you have been discouraged or disheartened? Collard, I have no intention of imagining myself a bandmaster. Dewar, do you think that this man asked to leave the service after 20 years and sacrifice his pension, which he had accumulated, if he were definitely not discouraged and disheartened? Will you answer yes or no? Collard, I will not. I will answer as I see fit. I do not know that he wanted to leave the service. Dewar, assuming that he did, may I have the answer yes or no? Collard, need I put myself in the bandmaster's mind? Who is to know what is in the bandmaster's mind? For this robust retort, Collard almost earned himself a round of applause from the court. That is a very good answer, declared the President. Dewar, are you acquainted with the last part of Article 11 of the King's Regulations and Admiralty Instructions, which is to the effect that if any officer goes so far as to forget his duty as to discourage or make dissatisfied anyone with their work, any officers who shall witness such conduct shall at once report him to his captain? Collard, I think you've read it wrong. Dewar pressed on. In view of that particular article, he asked Collard, did not the Admiral think it was his duty to report the incident of the dance band? Collard was not in the least put out. He gave it as his opinion that Dewar was entitled to make any report he felt it his duty to make. Then he added tartly, if the report were made in a proper manner. At this stage, happy for Collard, most uncomfortable for Dewar, the court elected to rise for luncheon. In the afternoon, the duel between Admiral and Captain continued. They got around to Collard's interview with the chaplain. Collard said that his flag lieutenant came to him sometime during the afternoon of 14th January and said, "The chaplain wishes to speak to you. Will you see him?" Collard continued. The chaplain came in looking very ill at ease and said, "May I speak to you about a matter that is worrying me?" I said, "Yes, go ahead." He said, "I have heard a rumour that you called the bandmaster a bugger during the dance on Thursday night." I instantly and indignantly denied this and told the chaplain he should contradict the rumour on my word of honour. The chaplain said he would be very glad indeed to do so, and that he would do so. He then left. Dewar, did you threaten the chaplain with the court-martial? Collard, in the course of conversation with the chaplain, I pointed out that it was a very serious thing to do to come and accuse me on a false charge. Dewar, did you say that specially severe sentences of imprisonment were given to those who brought false accusations against admirals? Collard, not so far as I remember. At last, Dewar was striking back. With those two answers that he had drawn from Collard, he had allowed the court a glimpse of the gallant chaplain's ordeal in the Admiral's day cabin. Later, in his cross-examination, Collard insisted that, after the chaplain had called, he had wanted to see Bandmaster Barnacle himself, but had been deterred by both Dewar and Commander Daniel, who had insisted that it would not be right and proper for an admiral to interview a bandmaster. It was soon after this exchange that Collard's air of indifference, which had been evaporating for some time, finally went, and Dewar's sometime harassed attitude of polite austerity cracked. Two men came perilously close to the point of accusing each other of being downright liars. Dewar, I put it to you that, after lunch, you asked me to come into your cabin and said, I wish to squash a rumour that the chaplain has brought me. And then I said to you, first of all, I wish to protest against your threat to me on Thursday night on the quarterdeck in the presence of guests. Collard, nothing of the kind. I have described the conversation which took place, which is accurate. Dewar, did you, at any period of this interview, say that this incident would mean a court-martial for you? Collard, I did not. Dewar, when the commander reported back to you, did you say, thank you, Commander. You have got me out of a damn nasty hole. Collard, I did not. I congratulated the commander on handling the business tactfully. I said I thought he had done well. The atmosphere in Eagle's hangar and temporary courtroom became even more heated when the questioning turned to the occasion on which Admiral Collard had wished to leave Royal Oak in his barge. Collard said he left his cabin and arrived on deck to find nothing prepared. I turned round to find the flag lieutenant, he told the court, and said, "Did you give the messages to the flag captain and commander about having their ladders ready?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Tell those two officers I wish to see them." The commander came first, and I said, "Why is not the ladder ready when I ordered it?" And he said he did not know. He would go and see about it. I said, "Go and see about it yourself." And he went. The flag captain came next, in an extremely bad temper, and said, "Did you send for me?" I said, "Yes, I did. I ordered the ladders to be ready for me on arrival. I ordered my barge to come out by 9 o'clock, and it is here. And I am on deck, and I find nothing ready." I said, "I am sick of you as my flag captain, and either you will have to go, or I shall ask permission to hoist my flag in another ship. I cannot get my orders carried out in this ship." Dewar, I put it to you, far from my being angry, I was extremely apprehensive, and it was you who was extremely excited and angry. Collard, I consider that you were in extremely bad temper. Dewar, when the captain came aft, you say you found fault with him. Are you sure it was not the ship you found fault with? Collard, quite. Entirely my flag captain with whom I wish to find fault. Dewar, did you not say you were fed up with the ship? Collard, I did not. I said I was fed up with my flag captain. Dewar, would you be surprised if a witness was prepared to testify that he heard you say you were fed up with the ship? Collard, I should say that the witness did not hear what I did say, because we were standing by ourselves well aft on the port side. Dewar then asked a rather desperate question. Which side of a flagship does the Admiral usually disembark? It got the answer it deserved as Collard growled irritably. On the side on which his barge is alongside. Dewar, did you want another flag captain merely because your ladder was not ready? Collard, no, I did not. There were many other reasons why I should have liked another flag captain. Dewar, I thought you said just now that your service relations with your flag captain were perfectly correct. Collard, one wants more than perfectly correct service relations with one's flag captain. One wants a loyal friend, one who will be one's right-hand man on every occasion. He'll put his admiral's interests before everything else in the world. Dewar went on to ask, even before the service? Collard snorted in a loud voice. The admiral's interests are the interests of the service. Then Dewar tried to inquire if the interests of the service and the admiral were necessarily the same, but the court stopped him on the grounds that he had strayed far enough from the point already. Dewar, had you ever found fault with your flag captain before this alleged conversation? Collard, I had. Dewar, will you state the occasion or occasions? Collard, on the 12th of January at a dance given aboard the Royal Oak. Dewar, was that the only occasion? Collard, the only serious occasion. Dewar, will you tell me of any trivial occasion? Collard, no. I do not think there were any others. I was very forbearing sometimes. Dewar, then it is correct to say that you told your flag captain that you were sick of him and wished to get rid of him on account of these 2 occasions. Collard, I did, because you did not come up in any way to what I require of my flag captain. Dewar, if I did not come up to your standard, do you not think that you might have pointed out to me what was wrong on some previous occasion? Collard, my appointment was for 1 year, and I thought we could go through that year without any break, providing there was a certain amount of give and take on each side. Dewar, did you, in the course of your conversation with me, use the word midshipman? Collard, not so far as I remember. I think I said, I consider I am treated abominably. The cross-examination moved on to the next day, 6th of March, when the Admiral returned on board with his barge. Collard described how he had looked down the accommodation ladder and saw a servant with the seas washing up to his knees, struggling with his luggage as it was being passed out of the barge. It was far too much for the man to handle by himself, and the gear was in danger of going over the side. There was not an officer in sight. Dewar, you say it was too rough to hoist in the barge. Will you admit that everything was ready for hoisting it in? Collard, I have not the least idea. That is not my business. Dewar, do you think the captain and commander of the Royal Oak incapable of judging whether it is too rough to hoist a barge in? Collard, no. Quite capable, I should say. Dewar, had you advised the captain that, as a general rule, boats should always be hoisted in before proceeding to sea? Collard, I had. Dewar, had you intimated in advance that you did not want the barge hoisted in? Collard, I had not. Dewar, would you agree that if the barge was going to be hoisted in, that it would be proper for your gear to be hoisted in with the barge? Collard, certainly not. Dewar, is it usual for an officer to stand at the top of the platform when an admiral comes over the side? Collard, I consider it would have been courteous to the admiral. Dewar, I mean actually on the platform. Collard, I certainly think that with the sea running and the admiral coming alongside, if I had been flag captain, I should have been on that platform to see if I could help my admiral. Dewar, I put it to you that there was very little sea running. Collard, I should describe it as quite a heavy sea for a boat, which you would hardly perhaps appreciate from the security of the quarterdeck so well as I should appreciate it from my barge. Dewar, can you tell me why you supervised the operation? Collard, because no one else offered to, and if I had not, I am afraid my gear would now be at the bottom of the sea, because my servant happens to be a rather small man. Dewar then harked back to the discussion he had had with his admiral on the quarterdeck before he went ashore in his barge. Supposing, he asked, that conversation was within hearing of ratings, and supposing an exaggerated account went round the mess deck, and it was said that the admiral told the captain that he was no more use than a bloody midshipman, do you think that would have been banned for discipline? Collard answered that he did not think it would have any effect on the discipline of a ship. Dewar, supposing this conversation went round the mess deck and wardroom, might not some of the officers and men possibly think that you might be just a little prejudiced against the ship as commanded by a captain you were sick of and wanted to get rid of? Collard, I consider they might have thought I was a little prejudiced against my flag captain and not against the ship. Dewar, if you were captain of a ship and your admiral told you that he was sick of you and wanted to get rid of you, and if you had been doing your best to make the ship an efficient unit, would you not be discouraged? Collard, no, I should not. I should go to my admiral and say, I think I should like to go to another ship. Dewar, do you agree that the maintenance of discipline largely depends upon carrying out such formalities as saluting? Collard, I do. Dewar, supposing that you did return on board and not return my salute in the presence of about 100 men, would you say that was bound for discipline? Most decidedly not. The discipline of a good ship does not depend on that sort of trivial rubbish. The omission or not of one salute to His Majesty's quarterdeck. After that somewhat startling answer, Dewar next attempted to seek his admiral's definition of discipline. It was here that the court threw up its hands. Practically all day long, its members had been treated to the unseemly sight of a rear admiral and senior captain at each other's throat. Dewar, intense and totally humorless, quite understandably so, considering that he was fighting for his reputation and his career, failing utterly to reflect, even for a moment, that all this solemn argument was about such trivia as a single swear word, an admiral's fit of pique, and a suitcase or two that nearly got a soaking, and Collard, whose behaviour was just as singular, alternating between moments of bristling antagonism and flares of ill temper, mingled with careless nonchalance and high good humour, so much so that it was difficult at times to divine his temper. In truth, the rear admiral was merely being himself, without any acknowledgment to fate or to the court-martial board that he was a very junior flag officer whose own career was just as much on trial, even if no formal charge was against his name. The court had met with the idea of deciding on the rights and wrongs of composing or passing on a letter to a superior officer describing an admiral's conduct as vindictive, and its members were of little doubt, being honest men, brought up in the tradition of the Royal Navy, that, short of a remarkable defence, one that none of them could even visualise, retribution would be swift and punitive, instead of which they had been treated to a rigmarole of petty bickering that would have been out of place in a midshipman's gunroom. But more painful, worse, far more painful, was the fact that all this nonsense, cheerful gossip for a wardroom though it might be, was being aired in public. Up in the temporary gallery, rigged in Eagle's hangar, were a whole rank of reporters taking down every word. It was possible to stand up in court and, by craning one's neck, to see all round the immaculate pale grey painted majesty of the proudest fleet in which was still the world's greatest navy. And now it was about to become a laughing-stock, for every question by Dewar, every tart or sardonic answer by Collard, was being transmitted to London, to the popular press and to Parliament. Heaven only knew what these foreign journalists up in the gallery would write. The members of the court were not the only senior officers deeply concerned. Roger Keyes, the Commander-in-Chief himself, was a very hot tip for the ultimate naval appointment, that of First Sea Lord. Was it possible that this idiotic and widely publicised court-martial could affect even his career? There were already those that wondered. The court had tried its best to shut Dewar up when he first began to cross-examine Collard. He had answered by waving that confounded letter from the Admiralty at them. But now that the man's line of questioning meant dragging Collard's definition of discipline into the arena, it was worth another effort at shutting him up. So the President, Rear Admiral Townsend, asked Dewar to stick to the charges. Collard's view on discipline had no bearing on them. Dewar tried to argue that they had, but Townsend said emphatically that such matters would be decided by the court. Dewar demanded that a protest objecting to the limitations placed on him should be entered in the minutes. Chief Petty Officer Writer William Barrett, whose onerous duty it had been to take a shorthand note of the day's proceedings, duly noted the objection. Dewar turned once more to his Admiral. Now his concern was the conversation that took place when Collard personally delivered his and Daniel's letter to Vice Admiral Kelly, commander of the 1st Battle Squadron, and the obvious precedent of any court of inquiry that might ensue. Dewar, when you took my letter to the Vice Admiral, may I ask if you totally denied the truth of the incidents described therein? Collard, so far as I remember, the truth or otherwise of the incidents was not discussed between the Vice Admiral and myself. Dewar, did you make any counter-charges against me? So far as I remember, I do not think that we discussed the subject matter in the letters at all. Dewar, did you not say that I had been disloyal to you? Collard, at the inquiry, I did. Dewar became heated and adamant. I am not talking about the inquiry, he insisted. Did you not say at this interview with the Vice Admiral that I was disloyal to you? Collard was a complete match for this man. So far as I remember, he retorted crisply, I did not. But I would not mind if I had. Now the prosecutor got to his feet and pointed out that what passed between the Rear Admiral and Vice Admiral of the 1st Battle Squadron was a question of privilege and should not be dragged out in open court. The President agreed. He told Dewar that, in order to allow him full justice, they had let him go as far with his questioning as he had. Now it must stop. Dewar's reaction was to demand that it be noted that he protested because he was not allowed to pursue his particular line of cross-examination. Once more, Chief Petty Officer Writer Barrett duly recorded the fact. From this moment onwards, the situation between Dewar and his Admiral degenerated even further. Collard insisted that if his flag captain had any complaint about the ship's discipline, then he should have made a verbal report to him. In reply, Dewar pointed out the instance of the chaplain. When he made a verbal report, had he not been threatened with a court-martial? Collard said the situation was entirely different. The chaplain had no right to see him, whereas his flag captain had that right at any hour of the day or night. Anyway, he had not threatened the man with a court-martial. Dewar, did you not, at the court of inquiry, accuse me of behaviour on the 9th of March when the ship returned to Malta, which, if it had been true, would have been most disgraceful behaviour on my part? Collard, I did. Dewar, may I ask, then, why you did not tell this court the account of this incident when you asked for a specific example of my disloyalty? Collard, when was I asked for specific examples of your disloyalty? The question was repeated. This time the Admiral answered, I gave the court of inquiry this incident to show how little help you were to me as a flag captain and chief staff officer, not as an instance of your disloyalty. Pressed harder by Dewar, Collard gave his version of the episode of the boys. Royal Oak, he said, and Ramillies were detailed by the harbour authorities for their respective boys when they entered the harbour the next day. Royal Oak was to go to number 12 boy, Ramillies to number 13, which was the nearest entrance to the harbour. Number 12 being abreast of the aircraft carrier Eagle, the very ship in which they were now giving evidence. As Royal Oak was taking the inner berth, Collard had left orders that she was to enter harbour first. But at some time during the night, the orders were changed and the boy numbers reversed. Collard said that either he had not been told of the alteration or that he had not noticed. Had he done so, he would have ordered Ramillies into harbour first. The next day, Royal Oak led the way and headed for number 13, the boy by the harbour mouth. Collard, who was on his bridge, turned to his flag lieutenant and asked why his flagship was going to the wrong buoy. The flag lieutenant asked the bridge below, where Dewar was stationed, and was told the order had been changed. Collard had great difficulty, he told the court, from stopping Ramillies entering harbour, for by now Royal Oak was lying across her course as she manoeuvred into position. Finally, Ramillies had to pick her way to her buoy through an unnecessarily narrow space between Eagle and Royal Oak. Collard's contention was that he had cited this incident to the original court of inquiry just to show that, if he had had a flag captain who watched his interests, then Dewar would have gone to him and said, the Royal Oak and Ramillies were entering harbour in the wrong order. Collard felt that he had been let down. His answers to Dewar's cross-examination on this point can only be described as most extraordinary. Dewar: I put it to you that the signal log was shown to you by the flag lieutenant at 8 a.m. on Friday morning. Collard: I dare say. Dewar: I put it to you that your signature is now in the log. Collard: I dare say. Dewar: I put it to you that you saw the signal. Collard: I could have if I wished to. Dewar: I put it to you that you saw the signal. Collard: I do not know whether I saw it or not, or even whether I saw the signal log that morning. Dewar: I put it to you that your signature is in the signal log, just below this very signal. Collard: The fact that I initial the signal log does not mean that I read every signal or even 1/3 of the signals. It merely shows that I have seen the signal log at a certain time. Dewar: Do you think that I was correct in assuming that the signal had been shown to you? Collard: Yes, I do. Now the prosecution objected. Dewar's line of cross-examination dealt with an incident that had occurred after the writing of the letters, which were the subject of the charges and therefore was in no way relevant. But there was no stopping Dewar. He persisted in asking Collard if it was a fact that the Admiral normally dealt with the navigating commander where a question of berthing was concerned. Collard agreed it was. Dewar: Is it not a fact that, after securing, you did not mention this incident to me but sent for the navigating commander? Collard: I talked to the navigating commander about it on the bridge. Dewar: Did you mention it to me at any time? Collard: I was proposing to mention it to you that afternoon, but after you left with those letters with me, I decided that any more fault-finding with you that afternoon would be injudicious, and it could wait. Dewar came to the last of his long list of questions. He asked Collard if, under the circumstances just described, the Admiral thought it had been fair of him to tell the Court of Inquiry that the captain's behaviour on that occasion was an example of deliberate disloyalty. Collard replied emphatically, I do. Dewar thanked him politely, and the duel between Admiral and Captain was finally over. Now it was the prosecution's turn to re-examine. Only a few questions were asked, but they most certainly underlined the court's attitude to an Admiral standing in the order of things, and its view on those who wrote complaining letters. Rear Admiral Dudley Boyle, the prosecutor, adjusted his eyeglass, glanced at his notes, and inquired of his brother Rear Admiral, Who do you consider to be the person most interested in the world to see that your best uniform comes safely up the ladder? Collard: I consider that I was. Prosecutor: In your judgment, is an Admiral able to decide whether he shall have his barge hoisted in or not? Collard: Entirely able to judge. Prosecutor: Do you consider an Admiral has the right to take charge anywhere if he sees fit? Collard: Yes, I do. Anywhere. Prosecutor: A question was asked that you were somewhat bothered about. Who had given an order for the barge to come to the port side? Do you consider it the practice of the service for the Admiral to order the barge which side he likes? Collard: Entirely.